Good morning or afternoon, everyone. TGIFS, thank goodness it's FSMA Fridays, our last FSMA Friday of the year, and our topic today, what can we expect when it comes to FSMA in 2014? I'm your host, Barbara Levin. As always, before we begin, let me give you a couple of housekeeping announcements. If you have any technical issues with our WebEx platform, you can call their technical support directly at 877-509-3239. By end of day Monday, all of you will receive an email that will allow you to download the slides and the recording of today's event. For your privacy, if you're online, you'll be able to see the names of our FSMA Friday team in your name, but not the names of other presenters. And if you're online with us via just having versus just having dialed in by phone, we'll be able to take your questions after we get through our initial pre-submitted questions. As always, we're very excited to have our FSMA Friday team from Atchison Group. As always, Dr. David Atchison, who's been our partner with FSMA Fridays, and we're very excited to have Jennifer McIntyre with the Atchison Group back with us today. Welcome, David and Jennifer, to our last FSMA Friday of 2013, and we're going to jump right in. As everybody knows, we've got some pre-submitted questions that we'll go through, and then we'll take questions from the audience. So we start every one of our events coming to you, David, saying, what's the latest and greatest since we all met last month from FDA and FSMA?
Well, thank you, Barbara. Always good to be with you, and thanks to everybody who's joining just a little bit before the holidays. Well, I think FDA has given us a couple of early Christmas gifts. Today they announced the proposed rule on food defense. I think it's a little shy of 200 pages long. Have to confess, I haven't opened it yet. I haven't looked at it, but there's some interesting holiday reading for us all. And the second thing is that they've done what I really hoped they would do. It looks like they're opening the door just a crack for us to have another go at some of the proposed rules on the preventive controls and produce. But I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, Barbara, so I'm not going to preempt that. But a couple of juicy little tidbits that the agency's thrown to us as Christmas gifts.
Great. Well, thank you. And we are going to jump right into one of those. With you, Jennifer, there are some pending rules. As David just mentioned, the food defense rule, there's the transport rule. I know that we haven't read everything that just came out, but what do you think that we're going to be seeing in what's still pending, and what are you anticipating and what came out this morning?
Sure, yes. I have opened the food defense rule because I like that topic, and so as David said, it's out there for all to see, that all 170 pages. And given the differences between food safety and food defense, I think that it's very interesting how FDA has structured this proposed rule to really mimic many of the elements of the preventive control side. So looking at developing a food defense plan, implementing those procedures, what FDA is calling the focused mitigation strategies, at the actionable process steps, kind of like your critical control points, looking for monitoring, corrective actions, verification, doing training of employees at those points. So I think that FDA has remained very flexible in the way they're seeking to implement the food defense rule, and it's really FDA clarified that this includes not only the a la carte food defense section of FSMA, but also the section in preventive controls in FSMA on intentional adulteration food defense that they didn't address through the proposed preventive controls rule. And same thing on produce. So much more to come on that. I'm sure that we'll have a session where we do a deeper dive into this food defense proposed rule. But the comments are due, as of now, FDA says the comments are due March 31st. We are still looking for the sanitary transport proposed rule, hoping that that comes out within the next month or so. My expectation is that that one will basically require people to have a clean truck. I'm hoping that it's not a whole lot more complicated than that, but again, hopefully in about a month or so we will see that proposed rule.
Okay, I'm sure we will be adding sessions on both of those topics, and be hearing a lot more. So if we go down, then I'm going to come back to you here, David. So food defense and transport are the pending rules. So what are some of the things that are left in terms? I think we're all expecting high-risk food and traceability and the VQIP. You want to look into your crystal ball there, your 2014 crystal ball on some of those topics?
Yeah, well, I mean, FDA has been saying they're going to develop this list of high-risk foods for a long time, and it hasn't happened. That list is obviously it's to some extent being used to drive inspectional strategies already. So it's used to determine the frequency that FDA is going to show up your facility, high risk versus non-high risk, as they call it. It's also being linked into the traceability requirements in terms of FDA having the authority to require those who deal with high-risk foods to have more robust records around traceability. So those two, to some extent, link together. I have very little sense as to when they're going to come out with either of these. I'm likewise the voluntary qualified importer program, which personally is one I'm really interested in, because I think it potentially opens the door for rewarding good behavior, and I'm excited by that one. But I think my excitement is limited to just the private sector, and there's nobody at FDA who's remotely excited about it, as best I can tell. So that one I haven't a clue about. I think these are all, relatively small potatoes compared with what we're seeing now, and clearly the emphasis is going to be on driving forward with getting these other major rules finalized, the proposed rules on human and animals, the produce, the foreign supply verification, the third party, now the food defense, and as Jennifer said, the transportation. So these guys will lag behind some, but I suspect we'll see something in 2014 on these, just really don't have a good sense when.
Well, like you said, I think there's still so much work to do with the rules that are out. I think that's where we will be seeing the emphasis. Jennifer, What should we expect regarding guidance documents? People have been asking about this at almost all of our FSMA Fridays, around the preventive control rules in terms of process and also in terms of timing.
It is a good question, and as you and David both alluded to, it looks like we will get a second crack at some of the comments on the preventive controls rule side. So that kind of begs the question, when will that rule be final, and is the issuance of guidance related to preventive controls dependent on the finalization of the preventive controls rule? FDA can issue guidance at any time. They're not bound to wait, required to wait for the rule to be finalized. But the question is, will they? Will they issue guidance or won't they in 2014? Process-wise, I think many people are aware that Deloitte holds a contract to source the science, to identify industry best practices around preventive controls for a variety of food types. And they're working with groups of subject matter experts, both in industry, academia, to kind of assemble the science and help FDA develop these guidance documents. But in terms of timing, it's really not clear to me when FDA will pull the trigger and release any of these guidance documents. If they will wait for the rule to be finalized, if they'll wait for some things to come into clarity, or if they'll go ahead and release guidance beforehand. My sense is that they may very well wait, which I think may disappoint a lot of people in the industry who are looking to prepare, who are looking for some sort of guidance in how to implement these rules, given that although they're not final, we've got a good sense of where FDA is going. So I think people are yearning for the information on how do I stay ahead and looking for guidance to do that.
Okay. So we've all mentioned now the second crack at comments for preventive control rule. We were wondering if we would get one. We learned yesterday that there would. There's a lot of redlining in the original proposed rule. David, in your gut, what do you think might come back in?
Well, we touched on this, I know, in the past, Barbara, and my gut hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot, but I think we're going to see supplier controls come back in. I think frankly, there's three things on the table. There's supply chain risk control, there's environmental monitoring, and there's finished product testing as the three big. Are they going to be back in? Or are they not? On a scale of 1 to 10, I'll put supplier control coming back in some way or another, and I think it's going to look a little bit like the supplier control systems that's in foreign supplier verification, i.e. you've got to basically do a hazard analysis of your ingredients and control the risk by a variety of means, which might include a third-party audit and various other things. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'll give that like a 9.8 that it's going to come back in. For environmental monitoring in ready-to-eat areas in high-risk facilities, I'm going to give that a 9.9. I'll be shocked if that doesn't come back in. I think it'll be limited. I don't think it'll be broad-scale environmental monitoring, but I think it'll come back in, and it's clearly an industry best practice already. And then on the finished product testing, I think it's much less of a robust public health tool. People do it. They do it for a variety of reasons. I think the cost benefits on that are much, much less than the other two. So I would give that at best a 5 out of 10 of coming back in, because I think while FDA clearly wants it, there's many on the Hill and in consumer organizations that want it. I think when OMB looks at the economics on that one, it may be a heavy lift, so that's why I would give it lower odds. So I think those three are going to come back in with those kind of odds of likelihood. In terms of when, the agency's basically said, and I haven't read all this either, this is very, very hot off the press today. It looks like we're going to get a crack at a few things again in the summer of 2014 with a quick turnaround. They kind of said that, well, you're not going to get another go at everything. Some of the things that were in before, you've had your best shot at it. It is what it is. I think we'll get a crack at things that they either change significantly, and there's some language in the stuff they put out about some changes on the water testing in produce, on the mixed type facilities, and if any of these other things that I've just talked about, supplier, finished product testing, or environmental monitoring goes back in, I suspect we'll have a crack at that too. But don't expect a long time here to have a go at it. We'll be lucky if we get 60 days on these. Frankly, the agency said we're going to give you another shot at it, but this doesn't mean it can languish. They still want to get it out by mid-2015 as a final. So I'm really happy that they've done that. I think it's really important that they do that. So I want to applaud the agency for having listened to all of us screaming, say, give us another shot, especially the stuff that you change a lot. But that's kind of the timeline on that, and it will be quick turnaround. But I'm really encouraged that we've got that second go at some of these key areas. That's my insights on that, Barbara.
Okay, and I don't know, maybe some friendly wagers on the chances there, the 9.8 and 9.9. I love it.
Well, I've been speculating on FSMA since it came out, and my crystal ball is about as opaque as they come these days. But I'm sticking my neck out on those odds.
Okay, let's see, Jennifer. Back to you here. Been a lot of conversation about the qualified individual on quite a few of our FSMA Fridays here. So when will FDA standardized curriculum be released, and is there anything else that we can expect when it comes to the QI? I think there's more questions than answers, it seems, on this topic.
Indeed there are, and surprisingly, I really haven't heard a whole lot more about the standardized curriculum. Over the summer, I was hearing that it was in its final stages of review, and yet we haven't seen anything. And so that's rather disappointing, and I'm hopeful that in 2014 we will begin to see this curriculum be rolled out, have training companies, educators adopt it, and offer the training not only in the United States but around the world, because the qualified individual is clearly a critical person in the preventive controls program, both on the human side and the animal food side, as well as in the foreign supplier verification program. So I think a lot of people are anxious to take the training, determine based on the standardized curriculum if they are qualified as qualified individuals, and it really is a prerequisite according to the proposed rules to getting things going. You need this QI to develop the food safety plans, to develop the foreign supplier verification program. So while I've not heard a whole lot about the qualified individual standardized curriculum that's being developed at all, I hope that it's near completion because I think we need it.
Yep. I think that does seem to be the general consensus. We're going to come back to you, David, for our last pre-submitted question, so then we can take some questions from our participants. So, you know, we always save the biggest question for last, of course. So the first round of rules have come out. The comments have been submitted. It looks like we might get a second crack at a few things. But one of the things that you have said consistently since the very first rule came out is that industry should be preparing, and they should, if they haven't started, they need to start fast. So can you tell us what are some of the first steps that can help companies get from that point of digesting everything that they've read in the rules to actually beginning to implement strategies for compliance?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and obviously, folk who are dialing into FSMA Friday just before a holiday are not the ones who are wondering what's FSMA about. They're plugged in, so we've got an educated audience for sure. I think there's a couple of things. As you said, all along is be understanding how these rules are going to apply to you. Do they apply to you? Are you in the seafood world or the juice HACCP world or LACF and micro type things? Do these rules hit you? If they do, then absolutely pay attention. It's a matter of building the team, looking at what you currently have around your HACCP systems and your prerequisites. Understand what you're going to need to do for building a food safety plan. We now have got pretty good insight into where the FDA is going if you're using imported foods, if you are an importer that falls under foreign supplier verification. And I suspect that some of the heaviest lifting is going to be with our foreign manufacturing and processing colleagues who are even more in the dark than the U.S. So one of the things to be looking at is ask yourself the question, is my business reliant on imported ingredient or finished product in any way, shape, or form? Even if you're not the importer of record, if you're reliant on that for business flow, then you may be buying it from a broker or a third party, or even you are the importer that's going to be impacted. Make sure that the people who are going to have to maintain that supply chain for you understand what they're going to have to do. So start pushing back. Find out what your suppliers know about FSMA. Are they ready? You may be ready, but are they? And I was in a conversation not very long ago with a very large food company, and they're doing a phenomenal job of preparing. And we sort of got into, hey guys, do you know what's the state of your suppliers? Are they as aligned as you are? And we sort of looked around the room, and they all said, good question, not sure. So I think as companies think we're in good shape, we're also dependent on our supply chain. Start to push that word upstream. Figure out whether your suppliers have got it, and if they don't, help them get there. Point them to resources that can help them. So, you know, ultimately here, Barbara, this train has squarely left the station. Some have said, oh, maybe it won't happen. Maybe it'll all fall apart. It ain't going to happen. That's not going to be. It will be reality. We will be looking at these rules hitting in 2015, and it's going to change our food safety world forever in the context on the FDA side. So let's just get with the program and keep moving forward. And obviously, a last comment around this formal part is look forward to continuing to keep people updated in 2014 through ongoing FSMA Fridays. So back to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's do this now. Let's go. We're going to go out of this full screen mode. So everybody now can see on the lower right-hand side, if you're online, a Q&A box. We're going to give you a minute to enter your questions in the lower right-hand box and hit send. While we're waiting for some of these questions to come in, let me give folks just a little bit of additional information. Well, we're waiting for the questions. I guess I was a little behind on that side. Let me give you some information about upcoming schedules. You can see what's coming up in 2014. I have a funny feeling that we just all decided maybe that April date that we'll add might be on food defense. We'll see. We're going to be continuously, of course, adding topics. If you're registered, you do not need to re-register. You'll get the information. If you've got colleagues that would like to register, FSMAFridays.com. We've got some great events coming up that you can register for on SafetyChain.com. We've got our How to Automate Supply Chain Controls on the 14th. What is food safety chain management? This kind of, we do a lot of educational webinars at SafetyChain. This is actually kind of a deep dive look into our solution that can help you with a lot of these needs and requirements at FSMA and all safety and quality programs. Dr. Tatiana Lorca, one of our favorite speakers, is going to be talking about GFSI, approved vendor programs, on Valentine's Day, a topic near and dear to our hearts. And one of our customers, Florida Caribbean Distillers, is going to be giving a case study February 21st. So there's all kinds of things. As always, if you need some consulting help to help you navigate through what you're going to have to do for FSMA or information on technology, you can contact SafetyChain or the Atchison Group. And, of course, we want to make sure from all of us here to all of you who have spent so many Fridays with us this year that we wish you a happy holiday and have a prosperous and safe food new year. So with that, we're going to go back up and get to some of these questions that have been coming in. And let's see here. From John, what should foreign companies exporting to the U.S. do at this point? I don't know, David, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, absolutely, happy to. It's exactly what domestic companies are doing. Question number one is am I, as a foreign company exporting to the U.S., do I need to comply with these new rules? These foreign companies are going to have to comply with the produce rules, the foreign and the preventive control rules for humans and for animals. So first question, am I in that or am I out of that? So if I'm a juice or a seafood under HACCP, I'm out, et cetera, et cetera. We talked about that before. So step one, do that. Step two, if you're in, then pay attention to what we were just talking about. Understand what you're going to have to do. Figure out how to build a food safety plan. Get those ducks lined up so that you're tracking precisely. The FDA doesn't differentiate between a domestic manufacturer who's under these rules or a foreign. They're the same. There is no differentiation. The only difference is under the Foreign Supply Verification Program, where the importers have the responsibility to make sure that those guys outside of the United States are tracking with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and particularly the preventive control and produce rules. So very similar, very, very similar. And I'm worried that many of those companies outside of the United States haven't got a clue what's going on here, and are much, much less aware. So we do need to raise awareness.
I suspect you're right, and I think this is kind of leading in a little bit to this related question that I'm going to throw to you, Jennifer, from Jan. How prepared are the brokers? Jan is saying, how prepared are the brokers and the secondary brokers compared to the food manufacturing customers or companies themselves?
Well, I imagine there's pretty wide variation in the level of awareness within the broker community. So some people are more hooked in than others. You know, we've been talking about FSMA for a long time now. We all feel pretty comfortable with it, but there is a large community who has never really been impacted by FDA regulations, at least not to this extent, historically, brokers being one of those communities. And the Foreign Supplier Verification Program and perhaps some other aspects of FSMA, we'll see as traceability comes down the pike, they could impact brokers, and they will impact brokers. And so I think that there is a real need for education and raising that awareness, getting the word out, spreading the message, and as David said in one of his previous comments, look at your own supply chain and make sure that the brokers that you're using are aware, understand the expectations, and hook them up with the information that they need. Because I think that there's people who are in the know are already in the know, and we need to determine the best mechanisms to reach people who perhaps are not quite as aware right now.
Great. Let's see, David, I know that you've got a hard stop at the bottom of the hour. I know, Jennifer, that you can stay on a little longer, so I'm going to put this as a last question to you before we let you go, David, and then we'll get the rest of those to Jennifer. David, Kristen is saying, how is FDA going to determine compliance with their new regulations? Will they rely on third parties such as GFSI certification bodies? How will FSMA be incorporated into current GFSI audit schemes? So I was not going to let you off the hook early, or easy, obviously, with that last one.
No, that's a really good question, and it raises many other sort of sub questions and components around it. So to take that in the two pieces, Barbara. The first is how's the agency going to ensure compliance? Well, currently they're going to do it in two different ways. If you're a domestic company, then they're going to be inspecting you. They've already announced they're going to do that through increased frequency. They're going to leverage more with states to do that. So whether you're designated as a high risk or a non-high risk, that's going to determine the frequency with which they show up. And I think they're going to be, they're not going to be perfect on that, but they've stated that they've met their goals for high risk. They are tracking with that, which, just to remind people, is getting in once within 5 years of enactment and then once every 3 years after that. For non-high risk, it's once every 7 years. I'm sorry, it's 7 years after enactment and then once every 5 years. So they're going to be showing up, and they're going to have the authority to say, show me your food safety plan, show me that you're implementing it. So that's going to be quite a bit different. I'm worried a little bit that the private sector is going to know more about this rule than the inspector showing up to do the inspection, and I think we're going to run into some rough patches with that, because FDA, I don't think, has got the resources or the budget to train inspectors to the level that we're all paying attention to here in trying to understand the way these rules work. Outside of the United States, this is kind of where foreign supplier verification kicks in. This will use third-party audits. It will use foreign governments to the extent that FDA grants them sort of an equivalency, in inverted commas, type of system. They've so far only done that with New Zealand. I know they're working on it with Canada. So they will be relying on other people to go and kick the tires on the foreign manufacturers to say, are you meeting these standards? Is GFSI going to do it? Well, as many on the call likely know, we've spent quite a bit of time in our business doing comparative analysis between the GFSI schemes and the preventive control rules and the produce rule, and they are remarkably well aligned. They're not 100% aligned. So my bet is that GFSI will align with the foreign supplier verification requirements and thus preventive control rules, so that if you have got a GFSI third-party audit of a foreign manufacturer, it will meet the requirements for foreign supplier verification program, part of which, depending which option is chosen, may require an on-site audit, which can be done by a third party, or it may be an option to have an on-site audit. So today the alignment isn't 100%, although it's extremely close, and if you are GFSI certified to one of those standards, it puts you in a really good place for being compliant with preventive control rule requirements. But again, I'm sort of looking into my crystal ball for 2015 and 16. I think we're going to reach the point for the foreign suppliers that when you've got a GFSI certificate, it will meet that requirement. Frankly, if it doesn't, we're going to end up with duplicate systems, which is not economically sustainable, and it defeats the whole purpose of trying to streamline food safety and sort of move towards the general scheme of global harmonization, which I think FDA would like, so long as the standard is maintained. So a little bit of a long-winded answer, but in the short term, domestic FDA states are going to make every attempt to be there, and outside of the United States, we will definitely see more leverage from private third-party auditors with, I suspect, ultimate alignment on GFSI.
Okay, great. With that, I know that you have to leave, David. Thank you so much for all of your insight and guidance this year. Have a great holiday. For those of you who also, members of our audience who have to leave at the right now at the bottom of the hour, you will get an email before close of business on Monday that will have the slides and the recording for you. And the same to you. Happy holidays. And Jennifer, we still have some questions, so let's kind of just go to those. David just touched on this a little bit, Jennifer, but James maybe is looking for maybe a little bit more information on. So has it been decided that if the broker importer is the responsible party for the foreign supplier verification program, they're responsible for the external audit?
Well, we've got a couple more weeks to comment on the foreign supplier verification program and the third-party accreditation program. And this is one of the areas where I think there is a lot of confusion and a desire for more clarity from FDA. What FDA did say in the foreign supplier verification program proposed rule is that the importer of record, as listed on prior notice, something that's existed for several years now, that person, that entity, is not necessarily who FDA would deem to be the importer who's responsible for the implementation and development of the foreign supplier verification program. So our read is that there's still some ambiguity around who is responsible. Is it that person on prior notice? Is it the importer? Is it the company that's going to be purchasing or that does purchase that imported product? So I think this is one of the major areas for comment, but I think that importers, regardless, importers, if you think you could be considered an importer, you probably want to become very familiar with the details of this proposed rule so that you can make comments to FDA and advise on who you think should be responsible and where that line should be drawn.
Sure. Okay. Jennifer, Steve is asking if you can expand on where supplier traceability is today and what you think we might see by 2015?
Traceability, my favorite topic.
I know it is.
So where it is today is unchanged compared to where it's been for the past several years. So we're still under the one up, one back traceability record-keeping requirements that stem from the Bioterrorism Act of 2002. FSMA did seek to change to improve traceability, recognizing that although we have this one up, one back system that on paper should work, in practice, it doesn't always work quite that well. And so the first step that FDA had to take in developing some proposed regulations related to traceability was to do a study, to do pilot programs, which IFT did, which I did while I was there in my transition over to Levitt Partners in the Atchison Group. That report was submitted a year and a half ago. Yes, about a year and a half ago. Released a little while after that, and then the next step FDA was supposed to do was submit a report to Congress based on the pilots with recommendations to Congress on how to make things better. How could traceability be improved, and are there additional authorities that FDA needs to really improve traceability? Because in FSMA, there are a lot of restrictions. So many areas where Congress directed FDA that they can't change this, they can't do that. So does FDA really have the tools that it needs within FSMA to make the changes that folks think should be made? So FDA, to the best of my knowledge, has not submitted a report to Congress and has said that a proposed rule regarding traceability will lag behind a good bit. So I hope that we see it in 2014. FDA has been collecting information on traceability for a long time, having public meetings that go back to 2008 or 2009 looking for input on traceability. So not sure when the proposed rule will come out, but when it does, one of the things that's important to note is that as per FSMA, these additional record-keeping requirements for traceability will only apply to high-risk foods. And David mentioned, that high-risk list, although intuitively I think we've got a sense of what FDA thinks is high risk,
right.
what we think is high risk, there's no published list. So FDA hasn't come out with this list, which is a prerequisite really to understanding where any changes in traceability record-keeping requirements, who they would apply to, who would be impacted.
Good. It's good insight, Jennifer, on, like you said, I know, one of your favorite topics.
Yeah,
I love this question from Jose. Can FDA today inspect food companies and apply some of the requirements described in the proposed regulations?
That is a great question.
I know.
And I think there are a couple of issues here. The first is the extent to which the inspectors understand what's in the proposed rules. And so that's its own issue in and of itself is, does the FDA inspection body, the inspectorate, know what the agency itself is looking for? These rules are proposed. They are not final. And so certainly an inspector cannot write someone up for violating a rule that's not actually a rule yet. So on the legal side, while they can't do that, it seems that in some instances there are some informed inspectors who are looking for companies to be doing the right thing, to be moving in the direction that FDA is moving, that FDA wants the industry to move in, which is that prevention-based philosophy, looking at the implementation of preventive controls. So I think that in some cases there is an expectation from FDA that companies are moving in this direction, but FDA would be hard-pressed to hold somebody to a requirement that just is not in effect today.
And another question from Jose. Does the memorandum of understanding signed between FDA and USDA in 2012 facilitate USDA enforcement of FSMA?
I think that's a stretch. The FSMA requires the agencies to work together to cooperate and collaborate. I don't think that it goes quite so far as FDA relying on USDA for enforcement of FSMA across the board. That said, I think there are some limited circumstances in which FDA could use branches, parts of USDA that are already out in the field doing some of these types of evaluations, similarly to the way that FDA uses the states, contracts with the states to do some of the inspections. So, for example, the now, I guess, defunct Leafy Greens marketing market order, I guess it would have been on the produce side, where USDA Ag Marketing Service was the one who was going out, looking at the leafy greens, looking at the growing operations. Perhaps there would be instances where FDA could use that type of process that USDA was already engaged in and try to leverage that. But across the board, will USDA inspectors suddenly be inspecting FDA-regulated facilities? I don't think so.
Okay, well, I believe, I'm going to take a little scroll here, I believe that was our last question. And let me see, yeah. I think that we have them all covered. So with that, everybody, have a fabulous holiday. Jennifer, thank you so much for staying on. Very excited to work with you, David, and the rest of the Atchison Group team as we continue on in 2014 with our TGIFF series. And everybody, thanks for making this a great event, and we will see you all next year.